first off, I want to welcome guests. Originally it was a different class topic, but because there's so many kind of people who haven't received this Tao yet, so I want to kind of introduce what this is all about. What is this Tao, right? From coming to the temple, you think, well, okay. Well, actually, first of all, I assume that you have some kind of interest. This is why you're here, right? You know, or the four of you, at least, you're Rochelle's friends, I guess. And you know Rochelle not to be a crazy person, like she's joined a cult, right? so this is not a cult. At least you have some trust, right, in her. So that's good. She's a good person. So I can vouch for that, okay? So actually everyone here is good, okay? We're here because we want to learn, we want to find out what the truth is, okay? So what is the truth? I mean, the truth is not, the truth that I'm talking about is not like the scientific truths that you can, science is continuing to discover, although that's kind of part of it. But the truth is, for one, is the truth about who we are, okay? As living beings, as spiritual beings, actually. So I don't know if you believe that we have a soul. As a human being, the brain, yes, it functions. It provides us, does a lot of things. But ultimately, the brain is not the consciousness. Okay, the consciousness comes from something else. Okay, somewhere else. All right. So there's something more than just this physical existence or this being. So now obviously these are things that you learn in religions. They all talk about that. But okay, so Tao is actually something that's it's not religion. Okay, although what you see looks like religion. Okay, so there's actually two aspects. Okay, you can say that the practice of Tao or the manifestation of it, for all intents and purposes, looks like religion, religious practices. Okay, and that's unavoidable. Okay, because we're not. I mean, as a physical being, these we depend on forms. Okay, we see all sorts of forms. Okay, so that's that has to be there. Without these forms, it would just be too abstract. We wouldn't understand it. Okay, all right. So that's kind of part of it. But we really want to get to the essence. What is the real truth behind it? Okay, so that is really what this Tao is about. Now, science is useful. I mean, it gives us a lot of knowledge, okay, and understanding about this universe, but it doesn't tell us everything. So science can tell us a lot about, there are these quantum particles that make up this whole universe, but, and then there are they discover, certain laws of nature, laws that govern how these particles interact and everything. That is part of, you can say that's part of the Tao as well. So the Tao, encompasses everything, right? In religions, they'll talk about God or some supreme being, which is kind of in control of everything. And yeah, that's one way to look at it. Okay, there is something. Okay, it's beyond our human understanding or of what things really are. But this Tao or this essence is actually, it's everywhere. Okay, so based on this current scientific thinking, right, the universe started, there was a Big Bang, right? So the question is, where did that, how did that start? What was there before that? Okay, so obviously there was something, but it was void, right? It's just energy, right? Based on what Einstein discovered about theory of relativity, energy can convert to mass or matter, and vice versa. So in that sense, from a scientific perspective, you can say that before the Big Bang, it was just pure energy. Okay, but of course, we know that energy by itself is not going to do anything. Okay, so there's something else as well. In religious terms, I'll say maybe there's God's will. There's some consciousness, something that can use or cause that energy to create changes. Okay, so that's kind of getting closer to what this Tao is, this essence. And so, I mean, if we look at ourselves, so that's kind of a macro level. If we look at the micro level, within each of us, we also have that same ability, if you will, that there is that essence that allows us to think, to create, to do all sorts of things, okay, and gives us that free will, okay. So, if you look at a person, a living being versus a corpse, what's the difference? I mean, a person doesn't necessarily, I mean, sometimes there are two reasons you can say that a person or even an animal is dies. Okay, one is some vital organ fails to function properly. Okay, right? It could be the brain, it could be the heart. Okay, it could be the lungs, it could be anything. Okay, so that's kind of from the physical side, from the biological side. But then there's another aspect, which is if that soul leaves the body, then that person or even the animal will no longer be alive, right? So we know that there are certain, sometimes people don't always die from that, the physical aspect of death. So like a stillbirth, okay, the baby is perfectly fine, but there's no life. Okay, so there's something else. It's not just the biological, right? Okay, so the Tao, so we have to understand that there is something. Okay, so we call it spiritual nature, that exists, but it is beyond science, because science today has no, as far as I know, has not detected this, the soul, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? And ultimately, it's something that we all have to realize and experience ourselves. Okay, yeah. Oh, sure.
I remember reading some story, well, it's not story, but some kind of report saying that a person who died, just right before he died, is weighed,
Yeah.
and after he dies,
Right.
The soul exiting from the body, the weight is different.
Right. Yeah. There was a movie, I forgot the title. It's like 8 grams or 8 ounces. I don't know, 8 grams probably. There's a movie kind of based on that idea. Is that there is something that the soul, whatever, leaves the body, and then the difference. There is a difference in weight. Okay, and so that's possible. But that's kind of an indirect, measurement of that. But anyways, through our own experiences, you can say, okay, there's another way to look at it. Okay, so you have a car, right? Car, it's just like we have this body. A car is not going to drive by itself. Well, today you have maybe these driverless cars, right? They're working on those, but there's still something that's controlling it. Okay, so there has to be. But it's more than just like programming. Okay, in those cases, you have AI, whatever. There's programming that controls the vehicle. But for us, it's more than just AI. Okay, so we like I said earlier, we can create these AI and create all these things. Okay, so there's something even greater than that. AI is still limited. No matter what, I mean, we can create through our own minds. It will be limited and not be as powerful as our own mind. Okay, even though there are as a Deep Blue or whatever these programs that they create for playing chess or Go or any of these things that can defeat humans, but that's because of their computing power, okay, that they can look ahead and look at all the various possibilities and evaluate those. But the human mind has insight and has intuition, which is not something that's necessarily programmable. Okay, so these are kind of part of the, you can say, the spiritual nature that doesn't exist in anything that we can create. All right. So basically, all right. So this Tao is also okay. So religions, the purpose of religions, actually in the very beginning. Okay. So where I'm talking about before the religions were actually established, right? So the religions, like for example, Christianity, at the time of Jesus, there was no such thing as Christianity. I mean, he was just talking about, God's gospel or whatever.
There's Coptic Christian, and Coptic Christian was before Jesus.
Okay, well.
There was a thing called Christianity.
Oh, okay, but it wasn't like, yeah, all right. I mean, there were various different teachings, okay, that existed, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of what we know of religion today, I mean, of course, they had Judaism. Okay, that obviously came before Jesus. But I'm just using Jesus as an example. But I mean, we could talk about Buddha or any of them. Okay, so we consider them to be kind of the founders of those religions, but they didn't really found a religion. Okay, they were just talking about what we call this truth, this Tao. Okay, in different terms. Okay, but because that truth is this Tao, this essence is invisible, okay? And it's, there's no, although it's formless, it managed to create all this, everything that we can see, okay? And so it's very hard to describe what that is, that essence. And, the various, what you might call, whether they're prophets or saints or these religious leaders, these sages, right? They tried to talk about this truth, ultimate truth, and Lao Tzu. I don't know if you've heard of Lao Tzu. Okay, so he probably said it in the best way, because he says anything that you can describe or you can name is not really the true Tao or its true essence, because it's beyond words. Okay, our words are very limited. Words that are based on culture, right? So these things are unable to fully describe what it is, that truth is. And so the truth ultimately is something that we have to seek within us. Okay, it's not outside, right? If the truth is outside, it's in the knowledge that we can gain in the scriptures. Yes, it's true that they left behind these teachings which are contained in these scriptures, but those are just hints. They provide guidance or hints for us to realize what that truth is. Okay, but those are the words themselves are not the truth. Okay, so it's just like if I guess there's a thing that the Buddha is like pointing to that full moon. Okay, the full moon represents the truth. Okay, and Buddha's finger pointing at it, that is just it's a guide. Okay, so what the Buddha wants to do is tell us to look at the moon. Okay, there's the truth. All right, but people start looking at his finger, say, oh, that's the truth. Okay, his finger being his teachings, his words. Okay, so unfortunately, that's what's happened in religion. Okay, unfortunately, once you lose the essence, you lose sight of the actual truth, the essence, then you start looking at all the other stuff that you can see. Okay, and so what happens in religion today is it's all on the word. Okay, the word is the truth. Unfortunately, that's kind of, that's missing the actual truth, missing the essence. All right, so and that's unfortunate, because then people, and that's why in the various religions, there may be different interpretations and different ideas about what that truth is. Okay, so basically then they might say, well, my interpretation is right, yours is wrong. Okay, so you end up in that situation, right? And that's unfortunate because that wasn't what the quote unquote founders or the sages or prophets had in mind. All right, they wanted all of us to see that essence, see that truth. It's just that people weren't wise enough, I guess you can say, weren't wise enough to really understand it and see it. And back then, there's a difference, back then and today. Back then, this truth was not ultimately is not really available to everyone. Okay, it was only those. Well, when I say the truth, I mean like this. What we'll be talking about is this transmission of this truth, I guess, this pointing out of this truth within each of us. All right, so this is something that, so we call it this Tao blessing, I guess, receiving this Tao blessing, receiving the three treasures. Okay, that's something that you would go through in a little ceremony, if you're willing to do that. But basically back then, it was not, the timing was not right. Okay, so you can say everything happens as a result of, the conditions have to be right. Okay, for something to happen. And so back then the conditions were not right, and it was only those who were basically enlightened. Okay, they're 99% enlightened, and they would be tested by whether it's Jesus or Buddha to see if they were truly almost there or truly enlightened. And if they were, then they would pass on this secret, if you will, this truth about this truth to them. Okay, so back then, this transmission, the purpose of that transmission was only to have this lineage until the timing, the conditions were right, which is today, where basically it would be open to anyone who has that affinity, okay, that to be able to receive this blessing, the three treasures. Okay, so that's where we are today, and so it's there's this whole process, this progression that has to happen, but today, because again the timing of everything, we're near the end. I mean, a lot of these scriptures, various teachings, they all talk about kind of the end times. Okay, now, whether you believe that that's going to happen, we can see kind of things are kind of going downhill. Okay, despite the fact that science and technology is improving, but the other aspect, we have to look at is the moral and ethical aspect of us as human beings, as society, that seems to be going downhill. Okay, so and yes, in our society we can create laws, right, to try to govern and try to maintain a civil society, but laws by themselves, you can. That's the reason why this country, it's like they keep coming up with new laws to try to keep the society in check, but ultimately that will fail, because it all depends on the individual, on how they view things, and how having the proper perspective or idea of what is right and wrong. Okay, and that ultimately, with each of us, we all have a sense of what is right and wrong. Okay, this moral sense, and that comes from our conscience, right? We all have a conscience. We know basically that it's wrong to harm other people, wrong to steal things. It's wrong, right? We don't necessarily have to learn these things, although of course we are taught these things. But ultimately, we do inside we do understand that. All right. If you look at a baby, right, a baby obviously doesn't have any of that knowledge. They don't have that sense. But they do, they're very natural, okay, very natural. They follow nature, okay. And we, from our point of view as adults, we say, well, they're kind of pure and innocent, right, because they haven't done anything. And that's, in a sense, that's true, although they probably have their karma too, okay. So karma is another thing that actually, I don't know if you guys believe in, well, first, okay, so there's the soul, and why is there karma, what we call karma? Karma then gives rise to reincarnation. Okay, so because the soul, ultimately, going back to that car example or metaphor, right, car is like our body, but then there's the driver. Okay, so if the car gets into an accident, we drive and we get into an accident, right? Who's responsible? It's the driver, not the car, right? So that's like our soul. So we are ultimately responsible. This thing that we call our soul is ultimately responsible for that, our actions. Okay, so then if let's say we committed some crime or did something, even if it's accidental, right? We're still going to be held accountable, right? And so how can that happen? Well, there's if we say that, it doesn't matter, things just happen, it's an accident, right? I didn't mean it, but then this world is kind of it's the roll of the dice for our lives, but then that kind of life, that kind of existence is kind of less meaningful than if there is justice. Okay, so there is universal justice, and that is what Buddha talked about in terms of the cause and effect, causality, and karma. Okay, even Jesus talks about it, as an eye for an eye. Okay, or what you sow, so shall you reap. All right. So these are different ways of talking about that. So ultimately, our soul. So if we did something, whether it's good or bad, right? There's always, it doesn't matter. If we did good things, then there will be some kind of, we would call it a karmic blessing that comes to us. Or if we did something bad, then there's a karmic retribution. Okay, and so that is the force that causes us to reincarnate. Okay, and so if you look at people today, why do we're born in different conditions, right? They have a different situation in life. Some people are born handicapped. Some people are born, they're a genius. These are all due to karma. Okay, right? Otherwise, you would think that we should all be born equal, right? All the same, but that's not the case, right? So that's you can say from logic point of view, that we can say there should be something else. There is something else that causes this, right? Difference. So that's what we call karma, and it's very logical. It makes sense. So the karma, of course, we don't know, besides our initial conditions when we're born and our lives, it can, basically these karmic retributions or the karmic blessings can manifest over time during a lifetime, right? So it's not all at once. It depends, again, these depend upon the conditions that we're in at the time. Okay. And also depends on what's in our heart and mind as well. Okay, that is also a factor. So these things, allow. Okay, so there is this karma, and so that is something that we have to deal with. And so the purpose of then religious teachings, right, is to guide people to say, okay, we shouldn't commit these sins. We shouldn't do these bad things, right? We should do good things. And they may or may not, go into that much detail about why, okay? Usually it's like, these are the commandments, you just follow these, and, you're good to go, right? And so, so that and the reason for those is just so that we don't create more karma, right? The more karma we create, the more basically our life is going to be suffering, right? Because we're going to have to pay back those debts. And so the idea is to reduce or stop creating those debts so that we'll one day have that opportunity to encounter and get the truth, the essence, okay, through this, what we call this Tao blessing, all right? Get those three treasures when the time is right. All right, so that's where basically where we are today, and the fact that you're here means that you have some kind of foundation, at least some kind of affinity to, at least want to listen to hear what this is about. Ultimately, though, it's going to be your choice, right? Your decision whether you want to accept it and to follow this path of seeking out this truth. Okay. We can pursue all the material things. Of course, you're young right now. You're learning, studying, and hopefully you're going to start a career after that. And so there's a lot that you have to think about and worry about in your life, right? So, but there's something that we should keep in mind also. The coffin isn't made just for old people. Okay, so life is unpredictable. I mean, we'd say, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I'll probably still be here a week from now, a month from now, next year, maybe 10 years from now. But we're really clueless. We can't predict really with any accuracy what's going to happen. Okay, because again, this karma, we don't really know our past karma, right? So there's this unknown, and so receiving this Tao blessing is also like an insurance policy, if you will, okay, to help us in case there's something bad in my past life, that receiving this blessing will help us to either mitigate it or at least to allow us to transcend. Okay, so that's what this receiving this Tao blessing and the three treasures is about, is to allow us to transcend this cycle of reincarnation, of birth, death, and rebirth. Okay, and this is, you can say, through the grace of God and the Buddhas and saints, that we have this opportunity to do that. Okay, so obviously this depends on, I can't give you scientific evidence that, oh, this is definitely the case, but certainly a lot of us have experiences that we gives us that faith that it is true. Okay, and so basically, ultimately, you have to have that faith yourself. Okay, and the faith is not necessarily in, that there is a God. The faith is in your own self, your own true self, that you, that you ultimately, that you can also transcend this life and death if you believe it. Okay, so that is ultimately what it boils down to. All right. Let me see if there's so also let's see, in here I mentioned something about, so in the Chinese character, right, they talk about this is it's kind of small, but the Chinese character for a person, man. Okay, so it's drawn like this. Okay, basically that here, it's bigger, right, this thing here, yeah. Okay, so what they're talking about here is that, so this is very interesting. The way they describe it or interpret that is that, so there are two parts. There are two parts to this character. Like the one stroke on the left, that's drawn from the top to the bottom. They're saying that, so there is something that we originally come from heaven, right? This soul comes from heaven to this world. And this other stroke represents this physical body. So the way they describe it is that our being consists of two parts, the physical self and this spiritual self, right? The other interpretation that I just kind of had is that basically we have a choice. We have a choice. The choice is either go up or you're going to go down. Okay, the going down, there's two, right? There's two on the bottom. The path of duality is to go down. Okay, the path of oneness is to go up. Okay, so basically, we talk about this Tao, this ultimate truth. It's the absolute. Okay, but we live in this duality, right? We live in this. You're familiar with the yin and yang, right? The yin and yang, the Tai Chi. That represents this universe, this world that we live in. Okay, it's a world of duality, right? There's light and dark, positive, negative. Everything is dual. Plus, it also means that everything is relative too. Okay, so but we come from the absolute, right? That is, you can say, our soul, our true nature is absolute. That essence is absolute. And for us to return back to that, to transcend this cycle of this within this duality, we have to go back to that absolute, that oneness, right? So how do we do that? So we have to learn, and that's why the teachings of the Buddha or even of Jesus or any of these teachings, they tell us to not fall into that duality. Okay, so the duality is like hate and or like and dislike, these types of things. Okay, so to not have those, because once you do that, you're still within this duality, and there's always going to be a problem. Okay, so right and wrong. Okay, that we tend to say, oh yeah, I'm right, and my position is right, your position is wrong, but it's all still relative. It's not absolute. There's no absolute here, and so we have to learn how to be in the other person's shoes, right? To look at from their perspective of a situation. Okay, so we tend to say, oh, take my perspective, it's always right. That's not the case. Okay, so even though, yes, our essence is absolute, but when we are in this world, again, this is talking about essence and then the manifestation of it within the conditions of this world, that it's all going to be relative. So even like we say, oh, a good thing, right? So it's like compassion, or we do good deeds. These are good, but they may not be absolutely good, right? So, for example, we raise a child. If we always say, oh, I love my child, and so I give the child everything that it wants, but potentially that may not be the right thing to do, okay? Because you might spoil the child, and they may not, when they grow up, they may not be, they might be always relying on other people, etc. Okay, or it could be worse. So in that sense, that love that is not, the love is absolute, but how you manifest it or how you treat, deal with people with that love is it's all going to be relative. Okay, so basically, so you can see there are two aspects. One, the principles are absolute, but the manifestation or the practice of it is not. Okay, so that's something that we have to understand, that in this physical world, everything is not absolute. Okay, even though we follow the right principles, like do not kill, for example. Yes, that is an absolute principle. But when it comes to the practice, maybe it's not so clear cut. Okay, it may be sometimes, well, you have to defend yourself. If someone's about to kill me, then I might, do whatever it takes to defend myself, and that won't be necessarily wrong. Okay, so that's something to understand, that we are living in this relative world, and so things, and that's really what it requires, our wisdom. Okay, so wisdom is something that is innate. We all have wisdom. It's just a question of whether we, manifest it or are able to use that wisdom. Okay, we tend to rely on our conscious mind a lot, but that is mostly based on knowledge, external knowledge. Okay, wisdom doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. Okay, our experiences, of course, can help us to, I guess, develop that wisdom. But ultimately, that wisdom is not learned. Okay, it's not gained from anywhere. It comes from within. And how do we get that wisdom? We have to stop thinking too much. Okay, because a lot of times we try to think a lot. We try to use our mind, conscious mind, to try to resolve problems. But it's not necessarily. We're not always able to do that. Okay, and that's where wisdom comes in. Wisdom is also an awareness of everything. Okay, so basically, our knowledge is very limited, for one. Our senses, right? Our sensory perception is also very limited, right? I mean, don't we wish that we can see through walls, right? We can't do that. A lot of our senses are just very limited. And so the more we depend on our senses, these physical senses, the more limited we become, okay? Because, again, they have limitations. However, wisdom is unlimited. Our awareness from that Buddha nature, that true nature that's within us, is also unlimited. Okay, so that's something that we should want to tap into. Okay, and we all maybe have different experiences. I've had some experiences also that basically, this I don't know, this wisdom or this awareness kind of guides us without us being conscious of it. It can guide us to doing the right thing, okay? And so sometimes, whether it's to avoid, let's say we're driving and to avoid an accident, or like in what's happened here, a couple of times in the temple is that, we have a kitchen and, there's stoves, and people in the kitchen, they were cooking or whatever, and then maybe they cleaned up, but then someone, I guess, left the gas, or maybe it was an accidental thing where they were cleaning it and then they turned a knob, but there's gas coming from the stove, right? And I have no idea about that. I didn't smell gas. I was back here, and for some reason, I walked over to the kitchen to smell the gas and to be able to turn off that stove. Okay, so that didn't come from knowledge or any of my senses. So that's something that's from an awareness. Okay, that's this greater awareness of things. All right, so that is something that we can develop. We develop it by, again, not being too attached or stuck on our own sensory view of things, okay? And so that the teachings of, like the Buddha will tell us to tap into this wisdom, into this awareness, we have to let go of a lot of these attachments, let go of these desires, these basically, emotions, things like that. These are part of our, what we call human nature, right? We all have this human nature. The human nature is the dualistic side of us. That true nature, or sometimes we call it the Buddha nature within us, that is the absolute, okay, the one. And so in order to get to that one, or to become closer to that one, then we need to let go of the human nature. So it doesn't mean that we have no emotion, that we don't use our conscious mind. It's just that we should not be attached to things, okay? Be stubborn and stuck on those, okay? And we try not to, again, fall into this trap of, oh, I like this, I don't like this. And because that will tend to end up in potentially conflict. And so basically from that absolute perspective, there is no like and dislike. There is no right and wrong. You can say it just is. Things just are. Okay. But of course, from a human point of view, there are morals. Okay, so it is wrong to do certain things, etc. But ultimately, we have to get to that higher level. Basically, receiving this Tao blessing. Okay, so we mentioned three treasures. Three treasures is part of that. What does this do? So receiving the Tao's blessing. Okay, so it's not just good enough for us to learn. Okay, we learn and we practice. Okay, sure, we practice, we do good deeds, but ultimately that does not allow us to transcend this cycle. Okay, yes, what it will allow us to do is to have a better, potentially a more blessed life in the future. Okay, but we're still in this cycle. Okay. The only way to transcend this cycle is basically to have this door open for us this path for us to transcend that, okay? And the Buddha and God has given us that opportunity through receiving this Tao blessing, through, getting these three treasures, okay? And so, actually all the saints and sages in the past, they all received that same those three treasures, or maybe in different form, but basically received that what we call this Tao blessing. Okay, and so even like the Buddha himself, right? Supposedly he enlightened himself, he became self-enlightened, but there had to be another Buddha to essentially certify or confirm that he was enlightened, that he reached that level. Okay, so in the same way for us, because we're not enlightened, all right, we can still receive this blessing, but again, it comes through. We have these transmitting masters. So transmitter Ray is one of them, but there's a senior transmitter who will probably conduct the ceremony. That they have this mandate to be able to transmit those three treasures to you. But it's ultimately opening that door. It's opening a spiritual door. Okay, opening your third eye, wisdom eye. Okay, so that is something that you cannot do by reading a book, reading a scripture, or there's no such incantation that'll open up that door. Okay, so the only way is through that ceremony. So ultimately, that is kind of the way out of this cycle. Of course, we still need to, we can't just say, oh, I'm going to receive this blessing, and then I'm just going to continue with my life and do whatever, I do. We still need to, what we need to do is to cultivate the practice, obviously, to change our ways. If we do have bad habits or bad temper, for example, things like that, we need to correct ourselves as part of that, what we call this practice or cultivation. Okay, so that is something that you can certainly come to the temple to learn more about those things. Okay, so let me see what else I say here. Okay. So Tao and religion. So in the beginning I said Tao is not religion, of course, but it looks like it. So the difference, one difference is that the Tao is the essence, and religion is kind of all the other aspects of it. Another kind of analogy or metaphor is to use a tree. If we look at a tree, right? A tree, you have the tree trunk, and then you have the branches to the leaves. The religions are like those branches of the tree. Okay, so they all come from one source, the trunk and the roots. Okay. The branches we can see, right? And we can see, well, obviously they're separate branches, so they're kind of different. They're individual, but we don't see the roots. And the roots is the Tao, this essence, this truth that we don't see, okay? Because it has no form, right? But without the root, there's not going to be the branches of the tree, okay? So again, without Tao, without this truth, ultimate truth, there can be no religion, right? So that is the other thing that we have to understand, the relationship between what Tao is and what religions are. But what the sages have said, Lao Tzu or any of them, right? Even though we cannot use the words to describe that essence, but you still have to use words to talk about it. And so they try their best to try to, describe it and explain it in a way that is what we call expedient to those people who are listening. The various religions, they'll talk about it in different ways, and they might emphasize certain aspects over others. And I think it's because of these things. Well, so for example, Buddha, he talks about compassion mostly. Jesus, well, he talks about also love, brotherhood, right? But these are all different aspects of that ultimate God's love or that truth. Okay. Also, Confucius. Okay, so the religions, you might not think of Confucius or Confucianism as a religion, but he's also talking about this Tao, and so, but basically. 他们叫他们进来。Okay, so basically, the let's see. I was gonna say. All right. So. Huh? Yeah, 10 minutes straight. Okay. So basically, they're talking about different things. So there's another way to look at these religions. So you have these three blind people, right? And you present this. It's an elephant, okay? And so and you tell them to describe what and they can only feel, right? So they feel this elephant. One blind person, he feels the trunk of the elephant, and he says, well, it describes it as this long, soft thing. Another one, feels the leg, and he says, well, no, it's this thick, very firm piece thing. This, I don't know, whatever. And then another person feels, the ear of the elephant. So they're describing it different ways, but they're all describing the elephant, but they're only describing a part of it. Okay, so that's the key. So the religions, again, because of the limitations of language and also maybe the culture, the traditions that they were in when they started, that they were limited by those conditions, right? And so they can only talk about it in certain ways that may be appropriate for those people at that time and place. And so that's why we have religions today. And so if we today people are looking at religions as kind of more superficially, and when you do it that way, then yeah, they're all pretty different. But underlying all that difference is the same essence, the same truth. Okay, and so we have to kind of, see the forest for the trees, if you will. So be able to see that underlying truth. And so that we see that, yes, they are all the same. They're all talking about that same thing. It's just that when we get stuck on all these differences or the superficial aspects or the physical aspects, these forms, then that's where we have a problem, that we don't understand the truth. And then we start saying, well, mine, this is right and theirs is wrong. Okay, so again, that's that duality, right? So we have to go beyond that, right? Okay, so yeah, that's basically okay. So ultimately, this transmission of this Tao, getting this Tao blessing is not knowledge, although you will get some knowledge. Okay, the three treasures. Actually, it's of the three treasures. There's one. The first treasure is a transmission. It's like a heart-to-heart, mind-to-mind transmission. Okay, you can say it's between God and you, or between the Buddha and you. Okay, and ultimately that's beyond words, and it's not something that you really, you're not going to get it through words. The other two, yes, there's a knowledge, but to truly understand these three treasures, it's actually we have to realize it again ourselves. It's actually the three treasures is a part of us. Okay. And they also represent three aspects of our being, our existence. Okay, and so that is something, again, so one aspect of receiving these Tao blessing is to transcend the cycle of life and death. The other is to realize who we really are. Okay, understand our true selves, and realize also that we have a purpose in this life. It's not just to pursue, making money and all these things, right? Because that's all temporary. Right? No one's ever taken their wealth with them when they died. Okay, so we have to realize there's something even more that's more precious than that. Something that we should realize. So again, look beyond the superficial, because that's all superficial stuff, the material stuff, and we need to look at what's really more. You can say seeing the big picture, seeing what's the longer term picture, right? So from the enlightened point of view, from like the point of view of Buddha, right, he says, well, life is suffering. And actually the next topic will be about the Four Noble Truths, which is to understand life, and so basically, life is suffering if from their point of view, because they see that this cycle continues, right? And we're basically ignorant. If we're ignorant to the truth, that cycle will be continuous and never ending. And so it's very important that we understand the truth and we find that truth. Okay, So this, we believe, is this Tao. Okay, that is the truth. Again, based on what I've said, it may not necessarily be totally convincing, but you have to kind of search for that within yourself. Okay, whether you believe it, whether you have any kind of faith, and ultimately, it's your decision. You decide. But remember, our decisions, will be accountable, right? So if we make the wrong choice, and we might suffer for it. So, like I said, there's no harm in receiving the Tao blessing, okay? But it's like, you're winning the lottery, okay? Now, so if you don't buy the lottery ticket, you're not going to win the lottery. So this receiving this Tao, like I said, it's like kind of like a insurance policy, okay? But it's not going to necessarily insure our physical well-being. It could, but ultimately it's that longer-term view that we can transcend the cycle and not suffer in the future. Okay, so yeah, that's basically kind of the introduction. Do you have any questions? Doubts? Because now would be the time to ask.
I'd rather talk to you afterwards.
So yeah, but basically, if if you want to receive that blessing, basically there's someone, for someone to receive a blessing, there has to be an introducer. Okay, so in other words, even if you walked in off the street and say, oh yeah, I was curious, and you'd be willing to receive this blessing, there has to be someone who's quote unquote the introducer to kind of bring you in to receive, or you can say it's kind of like a sponsor, if you will. So in your case, the four of you, Rochelle would be that person, because she's the one who introduced you to come here. And that is really, then you can ask her, does she have any motives for wanting to bring you here to receive this blessing? I don't think she doesn't get anything out of it. Well, she gets merit. That's one thing, but I'm sure she's not thinking of that, because she believes that she likes you and she thinks you're good people, that you deserve to receive this blessing, and that's why she brought you here. Okay, so ultimately, maybe see if you trust her or you have faith in her, right? And I hope you do. And so, hopefully. Okay, so but the other thing about this receiving the blessing is that there is a merit fee. Okay, that is, like I said, the merit is something that we need to. It's like a good deed. Okay, good deeds fall into kind of merit, and they are used to offset any karma that we may have. Okay, so obviously, so this merit fee, it's only like $10, $20, or whatever you're willing to give. That will be like your first merit. Okay, it won't be enough to offset all your karma, of course. That's something that we have to do over time. But it's the merit is not just like making donations, monetary donations. It could be all sorts of things, doing good deeds, basically just helping other people, helping not just other people, everyone, all sentient beings. What Buddha calls sentient beings includes animals, any kind of living being, to help them in an unselfish way, okay, without motive, just doing it because it's the right thing to do to good of others. Okay, ultimately, for us to become enlightened like the Buddha is to become unselfish, to forget this self, this ego. Okay, we have this ego, and that's part of our human nature. We have to overcome that, because the ego is really something that causes us to do a lot of things that are wrong, or give us the wrong view of things. Okay, and so that's something that we have to try to overcome, that ego. And so I don't know, any. Huh?
Why she wants to share this good day with her friends.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, okay. So, ever since receiving the Tao, I feel like, because I go to temple regularly all the time every Sunday, and I feel like it has really changed my life a lot because it has given me a lot of wisdom, especially during my high school years where a lot of drama happened. I would constantly get into fights with my friends, and then of course like I always like come out feeling really terrible. But I would use my wisdom, and I would also ask my parents and my sisters to help me with like control these fights and to make up with my friends because no one likes getting into fights with their friends. So I use the temple teachings such as putting others before yourself, and then being selfless, and then making sure that others around you are comfortable. I use those teachings and I basically apply that to my own life, and I felt very at peace after because I would no longer get into fights with my friends, and I always I had an easier time getting along with them and making a connection with them.
Right. That's good. Yeah. So this Tao can change our lives for the better. And so it kind of maybe gives us a different view on life and our relationships that maybe we didn't have the correct or proper views before, that we get to see things properly. And so this can definitely guide us and help us to improve our relationships with others. Okay. And that's important, of course, that we don't want to create more bad karma with people or anyone, right? So that's kind of the idea in terms of the practice. That's what we do. Okay. Okay. So basically, I guess that's time's up. And any question? Well, you'll have a chance to ask some more questions before you get to that point. But all right. So. All right, so if I had said anything wrong or anything that's not correct, whatever, I asked the Buddhist for forgiveness and also for your corrections and forgiveness. Thank you.